For 47 days, the retired German Shepherd had performed the same ritual at the abandoned Chevron station, left paw extended toward every passing car, every footstep on gravel, reaching out with desperate hope that this time his partner would return. Margaret Maggie Chen Murphy stopped mid-stride on her morning walk, her thermos slipping from trembling fingers as she recognized the tarnished canine badge collar around the dog's neck. This wasn't just any abandoned dog, it was a fallen officer's partner. Dorothy Castellanos gasped from behind her, car keys clattering to the sun-cracked asphalt as the massive shepherd lifted his head, revealing ribs jutting through matted fur and eyes that held the hollow stare of betrayal. The bloodstains on the concrete beneath him weren't old. They were fresh, mixed with prescription pill bottles scattered like evidence of something far more sinister. Maggie's mind raced back to her son Danny's police academy graduation, remembering his proud words about canine loyalty, the sacred bond that should never be broken. "Call animal control." "No, wait," she whispered, her military training overriding emotion as she studied the scene. How long had this hero been left to die alone? And who would abandon a decorated police dog to suffer in the Arizona heat? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Desert Wind's senior community as Margaret Maggie Chen Murphy traced her usual path along the walking trail, her thermos of lukewarm coffee growing cold in arthritic hands. At 68, she had perfected the art of invisible living, grocery shopping on Tuesdays when the crowds were thin, bingo on Thursdays when loneliness crept too close, and these dawn walks when the Arizona heat hadn't yet turned deadly. Her small apartment, number 47B, smelled of lavender and old grief, furnished with memories of Patrick's 5-year battle with cancer and the son she'd given up for adoption 50 years ago in a moment of teenage desperation. The $1,847 monthly Social Security check stretched like taffy over rent, utilities, and the medications that kept her ancient heart beating. After paying bills, she had exactly $340 left each month, a number she knew by heart because counting pennies had become survival. Her daughter lived in Seattle with grandchildren who knew her only through Christmas cards, and the silence of her phone had become a familiar companion. Some mornings Maggie wondered if anyone would notice if she simply stopped taking these walks, stopped existing in the careful, quiet way that defined her days. 3 apartments down lived Dorothy Dot Castellanos, 74 and sharp as desert thorns despite her arthritis-gnarled fingers. Dot carried secrets like rosary beads, 40 years as an Army veterinary technician, a husband slowly disappearing into memory care at $4,200 monthly, and an expired veterinary license she still used to treat the community's aging pets when desperation outweighed legality. Her Mexican grandmother's remedies, mixed with military precision, had saved more animals than she'd ever admit, and the residents of Desert Winds knew to knock on her door when their beloved companions needed help they couldn't afford. The 2 women had formed an unlikely friendship born of practical necessity and shared solitude. Dot's black humor about aging, "At our age, we don't have time for foolishness," balanced Maggie's quiet Irish stubbornness, the kind that had kept her standing through Vietnam War nursing shifts and Patrick's final months. They shared morning coffee on Thursdays, split grocery costs when possible, and maintained the delicate dance of prideful seniors helping each other without admitting need. Their routine had been unchanged for 3 years until roadwork forced a detour past the abandoned Chevron station on Route 89, where the sight of a German shepherd's extended paw would shatter both their carefully constructed worlds. Neither woman knew that within hours they would be united not just by friendship and financial necessity, but by a mission that would transform their twilight years from invisible existence into something resembling purpose. The dog waiting at that gas station carried secrets that would connect Maggie to the son she'd never known, and Dot to a conspiracy that reached deep into the Phoenix Police Department's darkest corners. The detour led them down a cracked asphalt road that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. Maggie's sneakers crunched on scattered glass and desert debris as she followed the orange construction signs, her usual route blocked by a crew replacing water pipes that had probably burst sometime in the previous century. The abandoned Chevron station materialized through the heat shimmer like a mirage of better times. Faded red and blue signage hanging at drunken angles, windows spiderwebbed with cracks, and pumps that hadn't dispensed gasoline since gas was under $2. That's when she saw him. The German Shepherd lay on sun-bleached concrete that had to be scorching even at this early hour, his dark fur matted into dirty clumps that spoke of weeks without care. But it was the gesture that stopped her cold. His left paw extended toward the empty road, trembling with effort, reaching toward every passing car with the mechanical persistence of a broken toy. The movement was so deliberate, so human in its desperate hopefulness, that Maggie felt something crack inside her chest. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, dropping her thermos. The metal container clattered across the concrete, spilling coffee that immediately began to steam in the morning heat. Dorothy's voice came from behind her, breathless from the walk. "Maggie, what are you—" The words died as Dot saw the dog. Her weathered hands flew to her mouth, decades of veterinary experience, recognizing the signs that no pet owner wanted to see. "Dios mío, how long has he been here?" The German Shepherd's head lifted at their voices, revealing eyes that had once been bright and alert, but now held the dull sheen of prolonged suffering. His ribs pressed against his coat like prison bars, and when he attempted to lift himself, his hindquarters shook with weakness. But still, that left paw extended toward them, an invitation or a plea that transcended species. Maggie approached slowly, her military nursing training overriding her fear. She'd seen enough suffering to recognize the particular way dignity fought against desperation. "Easy, boy," she murmured, extending her own hand toward his reaching paw. The moment their skin touched, she felt the tremor in his muscles, the fever burning through his coat, and something else. A recognition that passed between two beings who understood abandonment. "Look at his collar," Dorothy said, kneeling despite her arthritis. Her fingers traced the tarnished badge that hung from worn leather. "K9047. This is a police dog, Maggie. A working dog." "Was a working dog," Maggie corrected, studying the shepherd's condition. The badge caught sunlight, reflecting years of service that had ended in this forsaken place. Someone threw away a hero. Dorothy's examination was swift and professional, her hands moving with the confidence of decades treating wounded animals. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, infected paw pads from the hot concrete. He's been here at least a month, maybe longer." Her voice dropped. "And there's something else." She pointed to dark stains on the concrete around them, some old and dried, others more recent. "That's blood, and not all of it is his." The prescription bottles scattered near the dog told their own story. Tramadol, oxycodone, both prescribed to someone named K. Morrison. The labels were recent, within the last month, but the bottles were empty. Maggie picked up one of the containers, turning it in the sunlight. Why would someone leave pain medication at an abandoned gas station? "Unless they weren't leaving it," Dorothy said grimly. "Unless they were giving it to him." The implications hung between them like heat waves rising from concrete. A police dog, abandoned and possibly poisoned, left to die slowly at a location that reeked of deliberate cruelty. The shepherd's breathing was labored but steady, his eyes tracking their movements with an intelligence that hadn't been dimmed by suffering. "We have to get him help," Maggie said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew the impossibility of the situation. Emergency veterinary care would cost thousands of dollars, money neither woman possessed. Their combined savings might cover basic treatment, but anything serious would bankrupt them both. "My truck's at home," Dorothy said, already calculating logistics with military precision. "We can use blankets to make a stretcher, get him to the apartment. I still have some basic medical supplies." "Dot, he needs real medical attention. We can't afford real medical attention," Dorothy interrupted. "And we can't leave him here to die. So we do what we can with what we have, just like we always do." The decision was made in the space between heartbeats. They would save this dog or die trying. Consequences be damned. Maggie called her neighbor, Mrs. Giovanni, whose grandson had a pickup truck and a soft spot for lost causes. Within an hour, they had assembled an unlikely rescue team: 2 senior women, an 82-year-old Italian widow, and a 20-something college student who asked no questions when his grandmother explained the situation in rapid-fire Italian peppered with English curses. Loading the German Shepherd required all 4 of them. He was dead weight, too weak to assist in his own rescue. But when Maggie whispered reassurances, his tail managed the faintest wag. The drive to Desert Winds took 20 minutes, during which Dorothy monitored his vitals and Maggie held his massive head in her lap, feeling the fever burning through his skull. "What's his name?" Mrs. Giovanni asked from the front seat. Maggie looked down at the badge, then at the dog's trusting eyes. "I don't know his real name, but I'm calling him Rex. Like a king who's lost his kingdom." Rex's response was to press his muzzle against her palm, and for the first time in weeks, Maggie felt necessary. This broken dog needed her in a way that her daughter didn't, her community didn't, her world didn't. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. They set up a makeshift veterinary clinic in Maggie's living room, using Dorothy's expired supplies and knowledge that was decades old but still relevant. Rex submitted to their ministrations with the patience of a creature who had given up hope of better treatment. 4 fluids, antibiotics from Dorothy's hidden stash, soft blankets that still smelled like Patrick's cologne. "He's stable for now," Dorothy announced after 2 hours of intensive care. "But he needs professional help within 48 hours, or we're going to lose him." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Professional help meant money they didn't have, decisions they weren't qualified to make, and possibly authorities who might ask uncomfortable questions about why a police dog had been abandoned at a gas station with empty prescription bottles. That evening, as Rex slept fitfully in Maggie's living room, she sat beside him, researching canine units on her ancient laptop. What she found made her blood run cold. Officer Danny Murphy, killed in the line of duty March 15, 2018. Rex had been his partner. After Danny's death, Rex had been reassigned to Officer Kyle Morrison, whose name matched the prescription bottles they'd found. Morrison had reported Rex retired due to medical issues in 2021, but there were no retirement records, no adoption papers, no trail of what had happened to a decorated police dog who had served 6 years protecting Phoenix citizens. "They threw him away," Maggie whispered to Rex's sleeping form. "They used you up and threw you away like garbage." Rex's eyes opened at her voice, and once again that left paw extended toward her. This time she understood. He wasn't just reaching for help, he was reaching for justice. The 3rd morning of Rex's recovery brought an unwelcome visitor to Desert Winds Senior Community. Maggie was hand-feeding the German Shepherd scrambled eggs when the sound of car doors slamming echoed across the courtyard with the finality of a judge's gavel. Through her kitchen window, she watched a tall man in a Phoenix Police Department uniform stride toward her building, his movements sharp with authority and something else, desperation masked as aggression. Rex's reaction was immediate and visceral. The dog, who had barely lifted his head for 2 days, suddenly struggled to his feet, hackles rising despite his weakness. A low growl rumbled from his throat, and his body positioned itself between Maggie and the approaching footsteps. The transformation was startling, from dying animal to protective guardian in the space of a heartbeat. "Easy, Rex," Maggie whispered, but her own pulse quickened as heavy boots climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. The knock on her door wasn't a request, it was a demand. "Ma'am, this is Officer Morrison with Phoenix PD. I need to speak with you about a stolen police dog." Dorothy appeared at Maggie's elbow, having entered through the patio door they'd left unlocked for Rex's medical needs. Her weathered face was set in lines of granite determination. "Stolen?" she whispered. "That son of a bitch abandoned him to die." Maggie opened the door with the chain still engaged, military training teaching her to control the terrain. Through the narrow gap, she studied Kyle Morrison, mid-30s, clean-shaven, with the kind of rigid posture that spoke of someone trying too hard to project authority. But his eyes told a different story. They were bloodshot, darting, the eyes of a man who hadn't slept well in months. "Officer Morrison," she said evenly, "how can I help you?" "I'm here for the German Shepherd you took from the gas station." "That animal is property of the Phoenix Police Department, and removing him constitutes theft of city property." The words came out rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in his car. "Took?" Maggie's voice rose an octave. "We rescued a dying dog that someone abandoned. If he's city property, why was he left to suffer without food or water for over a month?" Morrison's jaw tightened, and she caught a glimpse of something raw beneath his professional mask, guilt, anger, and fear wrestling for control. "That dog is dangerous. He killed a suspect during an arrest gone wrong. He was scheduled for humane euthanasia for public safety reasons." Dorothy pushed past Maggie, her 5'0" frame radiating the kind of fury that had terrified drill sergeants 40 years earlier. "Bullshit. I've examined that dog from nose to tail. He's never attacked anyone in his life. His teeth are perfect, no wear patterns from biting. His temperament is stable despite the trauma you put him through." "Ma'am, you don't understand the situation." "I understand plenty," Dorothy snapped. "I understand that you left a decorated police dog to die of dehydration and starvation. I understand that we found your prescription bottles scattered around him like evidence at a crime scene. I understand that you're standing here lying to two old women who know more about dogs than you ever will." Morrison's facade cracked visibly. His hand moved to his service weapon, not drawing it, but touching it in a gesture that spoke of nervous habit rather than threat. "Look, ladies, I appreciate your concern, but this is official police business. I have paperwork authorizing the recovery of K9 Rex, and I'm prepared to involve animal control if necessary." The paperwork he produced looked official enough, forms stamped with city seals and legal language about dangerous animals and public safety. But Maggie had processed enough military documents to recognize when something felt wrong. The dates didn't align properly, and the signatures looked rushed. "Before you take him," Maggie said carefully, "I'd like to speak with your supervisor. This animal was clearly abandoned, and I want assurance that he'll receive proper veterinary care." Morrison's reaction was swift and telling. A flash of panic quickly suppressed. "That's not necessary. I'm authorized to handle this situation independently." Rex chose that moment to appear in the doorway, still weak but steady on his feet. His appearance had the impact of a ghost materializing. Morrison went pale, actually taking a step backward. The dog's intelligent brown eyes fixed on the officer with an expression that seemed almost accusatory. "Jesus," Morrison whispered, and for a moment his careful composure crumbled entirely. "He looks just like—" He cut himself off, but not before Maggie caught the pain in his voice. "Like what, Officer Morrison?" she pressed. "Like the partner you abandoned? Like the hero you threw away because he reminded you of something you couldn't face?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Morrison's face cycled through emotions, denial, anger, and finally something that might have been relief at being found out. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then enlighten us," Dorothy said, positioning herself beside Rex. "Explain how a decorated K-9 officer ends up dying alone at an abandoned gas station. Explain the prescription bottles with your name on them. Explain why you look at this dog like he's a ghost." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Morrison's hand shook as he folded the paperwork, and when he spoke his voice was barely audible. "He was supposed to die with Danny. Partners don't abandon partners, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw Danny bleeding out in my arms. I thought if he died naturally, peacefully, it would be better than—" "Better than what?" Maggie demanded. "Better than doing your job. Better than honoring your partner's sacrifice. Better than being a decent human being. Better than putting a bullet in his head," Morrison exploded, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "Danny made me promise to take care of him, but I couldn't stand looking at those eyes every day, knowing I failed to save the best man I ever knew." The confession hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and crackling with electricity. Rex's tail gave a single, slow wag, not of forgiveness, but of recognition. He understood betrayal, understood the weight of promises broken and loyalty unreturned. Mrs. Giovanni appeared on the landing below, drawn by raised voices and protective instincts honed by 8 decades of looking after her community. Her mobility scooter blocked the stairs like a tank, and her sharp eyes took in the scene with tactical precision. "Everything all right up there, Maggie?" "Just fine, Mrs. G," Maggie called down, never taking her eyes off Morrison. "Officer Morrison was just explaining how he abandoned a police dog to die in the desert heat." The words carried across the courtyard, and Maggie could see other residents emerging from their apartments drawn by curiosity and the smell of controversy. Morrison looked around at the gathering crowd of senior citizens, and she saw the moment he realized he was outnumbered by people who had nothing left to lose. "I need that dog back," he said, but the authority had drained from his voice. "He's evidence in an ongoing investigation." "Evidence of what?" Dorothy challenged. "Your cruelty? Your dereliction of duty? Your attempt to murder an innocent animal?" "He's not innocent!" Morrison shouted, desperation finally breaking through. "He should have saved Danny. He was trained to protect, and he let my partner die." The truth of it hit Maggie like a physical blow. This wasn't about danger or policy. It was about a broken man who needed someone to blame for his partner's death. Rex had become the scapegoat for grief that had nowhere else to go. "So you decided to execute him slowly," she said quietly. "Poison him with your pain medication and let him die alone because that was easier than dealing with your own guilt." Morrison's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand. None of you understand what it's like to watch your partner die and know you could have prevented it. That dog was supposed to have Danny's back, and he failed, just like I failed." Rex stepped forward, his movement careful but deliberate. His left paw extended toward Morrison, not pleading this time, but offering something that looked remarkably like forgiveness. The gesture broke something in the officer's carefully constructed wall of anger. "Don't," Morrison whispered. But he was already reaching out, his hand meeting Rex's paw in a handshake that carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. The moment stretched like eternity, 2 broken beings acknowledging their shared damage. Then Morrison pulled his hand back as if burned, his professional mask sliding back into place with visible effort. "I'll be back with proper authorization," he said, but the threat sounded hollow. "That dog belongs to the department, and interfering with police property is a felony." As he walked away, Maggie watched his shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. Rex settled beside her, his breathing labored but his presence solid and warm. Whatever came next, they would face it together. An abandoned dog, two determined senior women, and a community that was beginning to understand they were fighting for something larger than one animal's life. They were fighting for the principle that loyalty should be rewarded, not punished, and that some things were worth more than the paper they were written on. The community meeting at Desert Winds had never seen such attendance. The recreation room, normally reserved for bridge tournaments and birthday parties, buzzed with the energy of residents who had found something worth fighting for. Maggie sat at the front table with Rex beside her, the German Shepherd's presence lending gravity to proceedings that might otherwise have been dismissed as elderly meddling. Dorothy had spent the morning making phone calls with the efficiency of a retired Army logistics specialist, and the results were impressive. Harvey Goldstein, 81 years old and still sharp as the legal briefs he'd filed for 40 years, spread documents across the folding table like a general planning a campaign. His grandson David, home from Arizona State on spring break, had brought his laptop and a generation's worth of digital investigation skills. The combination of old-school legal knowledge and modern research capability was already yielding dividends. K9 Rex, badge number 047, was never officially retired, Harvey announced, adjusting glasses that had seen decades of courtroom battles. According to Phoenix PD records, he's listed as active duty temporary medical leave as of March 2024. No retirement ceremony, no adoption papers, no transfer of ownership. Legally speaking, Officer Morrison had no authority to dispose of city property. Mrs. Giovanni wheeled her mobility scooter closer to the table, her weathered hands gripping a manila folder thick with printouts. Despite her 82 years, she'd mastered social media with the dedication of a woman who refused to be left behind by technology. I've been digging into this Morrison character online. His Facebook page is mostly locked down, but his ex-wife's isn't. Divorce finalized last year, custody battle over their daughter, financial problems, and look at this. She slid a printed screenshot across the table. The image showed Kyle Morrison at what appeared to be a memorial service, standing beside a flag-draped casket with Rex at his side. The caption read, "Honoring Officer Danny Murphy, who died serving his community. His K9 partner Rex will carry on his legacy." The date stamp showed March 2018. Interesting choice of words, Harvey mused. Carry on his legacy. Not exactly what happened, was it? Dorothy leaned forward, her veterinary experience adding crucial context. I've been reviewing Rex's medical records from his active duty years. David helped me access the public records database. This dog was exemplary. No behavioral incidents, no excessive force complaints, multiple commendations for drug detection and suspect apprehension. Whatever happened to Officer Murphy, it wasn't Rex's fault. David looked up from his laptop screen, his young face troubled by what he'd discovered. "Grandma Harvey, I found something weird." The official report on Officer Murphy's death lists cause as gunshot wounds sustained during felony arrest. But the coroner's report, the real one, not the summary, shows blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, no gunshot wound. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and Rex's steady breathing. Maggie felt her military-trained instincts sharpening, recognizing the patterns of a cover-up. Someone changed the story. The question is why, and what really happened to Officer Murphy. "And why Rex is paying the price," added Mrs. Torino, a former public school principal whose voice still carried the authority that had quieted unruly teenagers for 3 decades. "That poor animal has been abandoned because someone needed a scapegoat for their own failures." Harvey's legal mind was already working through implications. If we can prove Morrison abandoned Rex without proper authorization, we have grounds for a lawsuit. Animal cruelty charges, dereliction of duty, possibly fraud if he falsified retirement paperwork, but we need more evidence and we need it fast. Morrison won't stay away long. As if summoned by his name, the sound of multiple vehicles in the parking lot drew everyone's attention. Through the recreation room windows, they could see two Phoenix PD cruisers, an animal control van, and Morrison's unmarked sedan arranged in what looked suspiciously like a tactical formation. "Showtime," Dorothy muttered, her hand instinctively moving to Rex's head. The dog had tensed at the sight of the police vehicles, his body language shifting from relaxed companion to alert guardian. His positioning between the residents and the approaching officers spoke of training that ran deeper than conscious thought. Morrison entered first, flanked by two uniformed officers whose uncomfortable expressions suggested they weren't entirely convinced of their mission's legitimacy. Behind them came a tired-looking animal control officer, carrying a catch pole and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced, his voice carrying forced authority, "I have a court order for the immediate seizure of a dangerous animal illegally harbored on these premises. Please step aside." Harvey stood with the dignity of someone who'd faced down hostile judges and corporate lawyers. "Officer Morrison, before you execute any warrant, I'd like to examine the paperwork. As legal counsel for these residents, I have the right to verify the legitimacy of any court documents." Morrison's hesitation was brief but telling. The papers he handed over were officially stamped, but Harvey's examination was thorough and professional. "This is an emergency seizure order signed by Judge Patricia Hendricks yesterday evening. It authorizes removal of a dangerous German Shepherd with a history of violent behavior threatening public safety." "Violent behavior?" Dorothy's voice could have etched glass. "Rex hasn't shown aggression toward anyone. He's been recovering from near-death dehydration and malnutrition, the result of abandonment by the very department you represent." The animal control officer, a middle-aged woman named Janet Morrison, no relation to Kyle, as her embarrassed expression made clear, examined Rex with professional skepticism. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen a dangerous dog that greets strangers by offering to shake hands. This animal shows no signs of aggressive conditioning." Rex chose that moment to demonstrate Janet's point by extending his left paw toward her, the gesture that had become his signature appeal for human connection. She knelt and accepted the handshake, running expert hands over his frame while speaking in the soothing tones that marked a true animal professional. "Officer Morrison," she said, standing and facing Kyle with obvious reluctance, "I can't, in good conscience, seize this animal based on the description in your report. He's clearly been neglected, but he's not dangerous. If anything, he needs continued medical care and rehabilitation." "The order is signed," Morrison insisted, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Judge Hendricks found probable cause." "Based on what evidence?" Harvey interrupted, his courtroom instincts fully engaged. "Officer Morrison, did you inform Judge Hendricks that you abandoned this animal at a gas station? Did you mention the prescription bottles found at the scene? Did you disclose your personal relationship with this dog's previous handler?" Morrison's face went pale, then flushed red. "I don't have to justify operational decisions to civilians. You do when those decisions involve animal cruelty and possible fraud," Harvey replied smoothly. "David, please call Channel 12 News. I believe they'd be very interested in this story. Police officer attempts to seize dog he previously abandoned to die in the desert." The threat of media attention had an immediate effect. The two uniformed officers exchanged glances, and Maggie could see them mentally calculating whether their careers were worth protecting Morrison's secrets. The senior officer, a sergeant with 20 years of experience written in the lines around his eyes, stepped forward. "Morrison, maybe we should take this back to the station. Get clarification from the lieutenant about the circumstances of this animal's retirement." "There's nothing to clarify," Morrison snapped, but his authority was crumbling like sand. "The order is clear." Rex's low growl cut through the tension, not aggressive but warning. He'd positioned himself directly in front of Maggie, every muscle coiled with protective instinct. His stance spoke of training that went beyond police work. This was personal loyalty, the kind that couldn't be bought or commanded. Mrs. Giovanni rolled her mobility scooter forward, her ancient but sharp eyes fixed on Morrison with the intensity of a raptor studying prey. "Young man, I've lived through the Depression, World War II, and 8 decades of men making excuses for their failures. That dog has more integrity in his left paw than you have in your entire body. You want to take him? You'll have to go through all of us first." The standoff stretched like a wire under tension, dozens of senior citizens facing down armed police officers over the fate of one abandoned dog. It should have been absurd, but the moral weight of their position gave them strength that had nothing to do with physical capability. Morrison's radio crackled to life, his dispatcher's voice cutting through the silence with professional neutrality. "Unit 347, please respond to your location for priority communication from Lieutenant Rodriguez." The interruption broke the spell. Morrison fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking slightly as he acknowledged the call. Whatever conversation followed was brief and clearly not favorable to his position. When he signed off, his face had lost what remained of its aggressive certainty. "We're returning to the station," he announced to his backup officers, his voice flat with defeat. "The situation requires further review." As the police vehicles pulled away, Maggie knelt beside Rex and accepted his offered paw. The handshake felt like a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The battle was far from over, but they'd won the first skirmish, and sometimes that was enough to change the course of a war. The Phoenix Police Department's Internal Affairs Office smelled like stale coffee and broken careers. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez sat behind a desk that had seen too many officers confess to mistakes that couldn't be undone, her dark eyes studying the evidence spread before her like pieces of a puzzle that painted an increasingly damning picture. The security footage from the abandoned Chevron station played on her computer screen for the third time, each viewing revealing new details that made her stomach clench with professional disgust. Officer Kyle Morrison sat across from her, his uniform wrinkled and his hands shaking with withdrawal from the prescription medications he'd been abusing for months. The confident facade he'd maintained at Desert Winds had crumbled under the weight of investigation, leaving behind a hollow-eyed man who looked older than his 35 years. Beside him, his union representative shuffled papers with the resigned air of someone defending the indefensible. "Kyle," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd seen too many good cops destroy themselves. "I've got security footage of you visiting that gas station 17 times over the past 2 months. Each visit, you left something behind. Prescription bottles, food laced with tramadol, water bowls spiked with enough sedatives to kill a smaller dog. You want to explain that to me?" Morrison's response was barely audible. "I thought it would be merciful. He was suffering, remembering Danny every day. I couldn't stand watching him wait for someone who was never coming back." The union representative, a weathered man named Frank Castellanos, who'd spent 40 years protecting officers from their own mistakes, leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Kyle, you need to understand what you're confessing to. Animal cruelty in Arizona is a Class 5 felony. Abuse of your position as a police officer adds federal complications. We're talking about serious prison time." Rodriguez turned her computer screen toward Morrison, showing a still frame that captured Rex extending his paw toward a passing car, while Morrison watched from behind a concrete pillar. "This dog spent 47 days reaching out to every person who passed by, and you stood there watching him deteriorate. Help me understand how someone sworn to protect and serve could do that to an innocent animal." The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Morrison's composure finally shattered completely, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to form words. Danny was my best friend, my partner, my brother. When he died, I promised I'd take care of Rex, but every time I looked at those eyes, I saw Danny bleeding in my arms. I saw my failure. Rex should have saved him, should have protected him like he was trained to do. According to the incident report you filed, Danny died from gunshot wounds sustained during a felony arrest, Rodriguez said, consulting a thick folder. But the medical examiner's actual findings tell a different story. Blunt force trauma, smoke inhalation, thermal injuries consistent with an explosion, no gunshot wounds. You want to explain the discrepancy? Morrison's union representative placed a restraining hand on his client's arm, but the officer was beyond legal strategy. The truth poured out of him like blood from a severed artery, unstoppable and potentially fatal to his career. There was no gunshot. Danny went into that building to save 3 kids from a domestic violence situation gone wrong. The suspect had rigged the place with propane tanks and improvised explosives. Danny got the kids out, but the building blew while he was inside. I changed the report because a hero's death plays better than an accident. Rodriguez felt her heart sink as the pieces clicked into place. And Rex? Rex went in after him, dragged Danny out while the place was still burning. Danny lived long enough to ask me to take care of his partner. Then he died in the ambulance. Morrison's voice cracked on the final words. Rex saved 3 kids and tried to save Danny. He's a hero, and I've been slowly murdering him because I couldn't face my own guilt. The confession reverberated through the small office like a gunshot. Frank Castellanos rubbed his temples, already calculating the legal and public relations nightmare his client had just created. Lieutenant Rodriguez stared at Morrison with a mixture of disgust and pity, understanding finally why a decorated K-9 had ended up abandoned and dying in the desert. The door to the office opened without ceremony, admitting Captain James Harrison, whose granite expression suggested he'd been listening to the entire conversation. Behind him walked a woman Rodriguez didn't recognize, elderly, military-bearing, with eyes that had seen combat and weren't impressed by bureaucratic authority. "Captain," Rodriguez began, but Harrison raised a hand to silence her. "Lieutenant, meet Margaret Murphy," Harrison said, and Rodriguez felt the world shift beneath her feet. "She's Danny Murphy's biological mother. Gave him up for adoption in 1974. Never knew what happened to him until this morning when she called asking about her son's K-9 partner." Maggie stepped into the room with the controlled precision of someone walking into battle. Her eyes found Morrison immediately, and he flinched under her gaze as if she'd struck him. "Officer Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd comforted dying soldiers and faced down military bureaucracy. "I understand you made my son a promise you didn't keep." Morrison couldn't meet her eyes. "Ma'am, You what?" Maggie's voice remained level, but steel ran through it like rebar in concrete. "You decided that Rex's life meant less than your convenience. That Danny's dying wish could be ignored because it made you uncomfortable?" Captain Harrison consulted a tablet, his expression grim. "Mrs. Murphy has been in contact with Channel 12 News, the Arizona Republic, and 3 different animal rights organizations. The story goes live at 6 tonight, whether we cooperate or not. She's offering us a chance to get ahead of it." The threat was clear and devastating. A story about police corruption, animal abuse, and cover-ups would destroy careers and damage the department's reputation for years. Rodriguez had seen smaller scandals end political careers and trigger federal investigations. "What do you want?" Harrison asked Maggie directly, bypassing the usual chain of command in recognition of her moral authority. Maggie's answer was immediate and non-negotiable. "I want Rex's medical bills paid by the department that failed him. I want Morrison prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want Danny's service record corrected to reflect the truth about how he died. And I want Rex officially retired with full honors and released to my custody." Morrison looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Mrs. Murphy, Danny talked about you all the time. Said his birth mother was a war hero who gave him up so he could have a better life. He was proud of you, even though he never got to meet you." "And I never got to be proud of him," Maggie replied, her voice finally showing cracks. "But I can be proud of Rex, and I can make sure Danny's partner gets the life he deserves. The life you tried to steal from him." Frank Castellanos cleared his throat, recognizing when negotiation was preferable to litigation. "My client is prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation. Guilty plea, full restitution, testimony against any others involved in the cover-up. In exchange, we'd like consideration for his PTSD diagnosis and military service record." Rodriguez looked at Captain Harrison, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The department needed this story controlled, and Morrison was expendable. "We can work with that, but Morrison makes a public apology as part of his sentencing. Full admission of guilt, explanation of his actions, and acknowledgement of Rex's heroic service." The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details that would transform a potential public relations disaster into a story of redemption and justice. Morrison would plead guilty to animal cruelty and face 18 months in county jail plus 5 years probation. Rex would receive full veterinary care funded by the police pension fund, and Danny Murphy's personnel file would be corrected to reflect his true heroism. As they prepared to leave, Maggie turned back to Morrison one final time. "Kyle," she said, using his first name for the first time, "Danny didn't die because you failed him. He died because he chose to save those children, knowing the risk. Rex didn't fail either. He tried to save Danny just like he was trained to do. The only failure here was your decision to abandon them both." Morrison nodded, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the magnitude of what he'd done. "Ma'am, if there's anything I can ever do to make this right—" "There is," Maggie said firmly. "Get help. Get clean. Make sure no other animal ever suffers because you can't face your own pain. And remember that Danny died a hero, not a victim of your guilt." The afternoon sun was brutal as Maggie walked out of the police station, but she felt lighter than she had in decades. Somewhere across town, Rex was waiting for her at Desert Winds, probably extending his paw to Dorothy and receiving the kind of love that should have been his all along. Tonight, she would sit beside him and read aloud from Danny's Police Academy graduation speech, which Captain Harrison had given her as an unexpected gift. For the first time in 50 years, she was going home to her son's partner, carrying the promise that neither of them would ever be abandoned again. The veterinary oncology unit at Arizona State University's teaching hospital hummed with quiet efficiency, its sterile corridors a stark contrast to the emotional chaos that had brought Maggie and Rex to this moment. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Maggie despite the shared surname, delivered the diagnosis with the clinical precision that 40 years of veterinary medicine demanded, but her eyes held the compassion that separated good doctors from great ones. The chronic tramadol poisoning masked the early symptoms, Dr. Chen explained, her hands gentle as she showed Maggie the X-rays illuminated on the wall-mounted viewer. "What we're looking at is advanced osteosarcoma, bone cancer, in Rex's left hind leg. It's already metastasized to his lymph nodes and likely his lungs. Without the months of systematic poisoning, we might have caught this early enough for aggressive treatment." Maggie felt the words hit her like physical blows. Rex lay on the examination table, his intelligent brown eyes tracking their conversation with an awareness that broke her heart. His left paw, the same paw that had reached out desperately for 47 days, extended toward her in what had become their ritual greeting, but the movement was weaker now, more effort than instinct. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With palliative care, pain management, and the nutritional support he's been receiving, perhaps 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 3 months if we're fortunate. The cancer is aggressive, but he's been fighting it for longer than we initially realized. His will to live is extraordinary." Dorothy stood beside the examination table, her weathered hands steady as she stroked Rex's head with the expertise of someone who'd comforted countless animals in their final days. "What about quality of life? Can we keep him comfortable?" Dr. Chen nodded, consulting her tablet with professional efficiency. "Absolutely. We can manage his pain with appropriate medications, ironically controlled doses of the same tramadol that was used to poison him, anti-inflammatory drugs, dietary supplements, physical therapy when he's up for it. The goal is to ensure his remaining time is filled with dignity and love, not suffering." The financial reality hit Maggie like a second diagnosis. Even palliative care would cost thousands of dollars, money that neither she nor the tight-knit community at Desert Winds possessed. Her Social Security check barely covered basic living expenses, and Dorothy's savings were depleted by her husband's memory care facility costs. The Phoenix Police Department had agreed to cover Rex's emergency treatment costs, but ongoing cancer care was another matter entirely. "Dr. Chen," Maggie said carefully, "what are we talking about in terms of cost?" "For comprehensive palliative care, including medications, regular monitoring, and emergency interventions, we're looking at approximately $4,000 to $6,000 per month. I understand that's substantial, but there might be options." Harvey Goldstein's voice came from the doorway, his presence unexpected but welcome. The elderly lawyer had driven across town with news that he'd been saving for the right moment. "Actually, there might be more options than you realize. David and I have been doing some additional research into Danny Murphy's service record." He entered the examination room carrying a manila folder thick with documents, his expression mixing triumph with righteous indignation. "It seems that Danny Murphy left a will when he joined the police force, standard procedure for officers in high-risk positions. The executor was supposed to be Kyle Morrison, but he never filed the necessary paperwork." Maggie's heart began beating faster as Harvey opened the folder, revealing pages of legal documents that could change everything. Rex's ears perked up at the tension in the room, his survival instincts still sharp despite his physical decline. "Danny left his entire estate to Rex's care," Harvey continued, his lawyer's precision making every word count. "Life insurance policy, savings account, even the proceeds from selling his apartment. The total comes to approximately $143,000, earmarked specifically for his canine partner's retirement and medical needs." The room fell silent, except for the hum of medical equipment and Rex's steady breathing. Dorothy's hand stilled on Rex's head as the implications sank in. Dr. Chen looked between the humans with growing understanding, while Maggie felt tears streaming down her face. "Morrison stole it," she whispered. "He let Rex suffer while sitting on money that was meant to care for him. Technically, he failed to execute his duties as executor," Harvey corrected with legal precision, "which constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and possible fraud. The good news is that the money is still there, accruing interest in an account that's been untouched for 6 years. The bad news is that accessing it will require probate court proceedings that could take months." Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently, drawing attention back to Rex's immediate needs. "If I may suggest, there's a possibility for interim arrangements. The veterinary school has a program for exceptional cases, animals whose stories can contribute to our students' education while receiving donated care. Rex's case is certainly unique enough to qualify." "You mean use him as a teaching case?" Dorothy's protective instincts flared immediately. "Make him perform for students while he's dying?" "Not perform," Dr. Chen assured her. more like allowing veterinary students to observe his care, learn about pain management in terminal cases, understand the bond between working animals and their handlers. Rex would receive the finest care available, and the students would learn lessons about compassion that they can't get from textbooks. The proposal hung in the air while Maggie wrestled with competing emotions. Rex deserved privacy and peace in his final months, but he also deserved the best medical care available. The irony wasn't lost on her. Rex had spent his career serving the public, and now he might serve one final time by teaching the next generation of veterinarians. "What would it involve?" she asked finally. "He'd stay here during weekdays for monitoring and treatment, but go home with you on weekends and evenings. Students would observe his care routine, learn about pain assessment, end-of-life decision-making. It's educational, but it's also deeply humane. We're not just teaching medical techniques, we're teaching future veterinarians how to honor the animals in their care." Rex chose that moment to lift his head and look directly at Maggie, his expression holding the same intelligence and trust that had sustained him through 47 days of abandonment. His left paw extended toward her, not pleading now, but offering partnership in this final chapter of his life. "He's been a teacher his whole career," Maggie said softly, accepting Rex's paw in her hands. "Training with Danny, showing other officers how to work with canine partners, even teaching us at Desert Winds about loyalty and forgiveness. Maybe he can teach one more lesson." Dorothy nodded slowly, her practical nature overcoming emotional reservations. "And the students need to learn that animals aren't just medical cases. They're individuals with histories and feelings and dignity that deserves respect." "Doctor." Chen smiled for the first time since delivering the diagnosis. "I think Rex could teach them that better than anyone. His story, the abandonment, the poisoning, the rescue by your community, it's exactly the kind of case that helps students understand why we do this work." Harvey was already making notes in his legal pad, his mind working through the logistics of the arrangement. "I can expedite the probate proceedings if Rex is receiving immediate care. Emergency motions, temporary executor appointment. The court will be sympathetic given the circumstances." As they finalized the details, Maggie felt a strange sense of completion settling over her. Rex would spend his remaining time not as a discarded relic of someone else's failure, but as a teacher and partner, surrounded by people committed to his comfort and dignity. Danny's money would eventually ensure that Rex's care never became a financial burden, while the veterinary school program would provide immediate support. "There's one more thing," Dr. Chen added as they prepared to leave. "We'd like to document Rex's story as part of our animal welfare education program. Video testimonials, case study materials, maybe even a short documentary about the bond between working animals and their communities. With your permission, of course." Maggie looked down at Rex, who was already showing more energy than he'd displayed in weeks, as if understanding that he had a purpose again. "Rex has been reaching out to people his whole life," she said. "I think he'd like the chance to reach a few more." The drive back to Desert Winds was quiet, Rex sleeping peacefully in the back seat, while Maggie processed the day's revelations. Tomorrow, they would begin a new routine. Weekdays at the veterinary school, weekends at home, surrounded by the community that had fought to save him. It wasn't the ending she'd hoped for when she first saw his extended paw at that abandoned gas station, but it was an ending filled with dignity, purpose, and love. And sometimes, that was enough to transform tragedy into something approaching grace. The revelation came on a Thursday morning when the monsoon clouds were building over the Phoenix Mountains, threatening the kind of storm that could flood desert washes and strand motorists for hours. Harvey's grandson David had been working through the night, his computer screen illuminated by caffeine-fueled determination and the kind of obsessive focus that only 20-year-olds could sustain. What he discovered in the archived police database would shatter everything they thought they knew about Danny Murphy's death and Kyle Morrison's guilt. Grandpa Harvey." David's voice cracked with exhaustion and excitement as he burst into the Desert Winds recreation room where the daily strategy meeting was convening. "You need to see this. All of you need to see this." Maggie looked up from feeding Rex his morning medication, noting how the German Shepherd's appetite had improved since beginning his treatment at the veterinary school. His eyes were brighter, his coat glossier, and while the cancer still ravaged his body, his spirit seemed to have found new purpose in teaching the next generation of animal doctors. David's laptop displayed a grainy surveillance video, the timestamp showing March 15, 2018, the day Danny Murphy died. The footage came from a traffic camera positioned 3 blocks from the incident site, capturing what the official investigation had missed or deliberately ignored. "This camera recorded the entire response," David explained, his voice trembling with the magnitude of his discovery. "The building explosion, the emergency vehicles, everything. But that's not the important part. Watch what happens at timestamp 14:23. The video played in slow motion, showing emergency vehicles arriving at a residential building engulfed in flames. Through the smoke and chaos, a figure emerged carrying what appeared to be a small child, then turned back toward the burning structure. Rex was visible, his German Shepherd silhouette unmistakable as he followed his handler into danger. "Danny saved the first child," Dorothy observed, her veterinary training helping her identify details others might miss. "Rex is staying right with him, exactly as trained." "Keep watching," David urged, his finger hovering over the laptop's trackpad. "This is where everything changes." The explosion, when it came, was devastating even through the low-resolution camera. The building's windows blew out in sequence, and a figure was thrown clear by the blast, not Danny, but someone else entirely. In the aftermath, as smoke obscured the scene, 2 distinct shapes could be seen: Rex dragging an unconscious form away from the building, and another person approaching from the opposite direction. "The official report says Kyle Morrison was the second officer on scene," Harvey said, consulting the documents spread across their table. "Arrived 15 minutes after the initial call, found Danny critically injured, called for medical assistance." "That's not what happened," David said, his voice steady despite his youth. "Look at the enhanced footage I've been working on all night." The next video file was clearer, processed through software that David had borrowed from his computer science program. The details were stark and undeniable. Kyle Morrison wasn't arriving on scene. He was already there, had been there before the explosion, and was running away from the building when it detonated. "Morrison was inside the building with Danny," Maggie said slowly, the implications dawning on her like a cold sunrise. "He was there when it happened." Dorothy leaned closer to the screen, her weathered eyes studying every pixel. "And he ran. Left Danny and those children to die while he saved himself." The final piece of evidence was audio from Morrison's radio transmissions, recovered from archived dispatch recordings that David had accessed through public records requests. His voice, recorded moments after the explosion, was clear and damning. "Officer down, officer down. Murphy went in alone against orders. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Building collapsed before I could provide backup." The lie was so complete, so calculated, that it took Maggie's breath away. Rex, lying beside her chair, raised his head as if sensing the shift in emotional atmosphere. His left paw extended toward her, not seeking comfort this time, but offering it, as if he understood that she was learning the truth about her son's death. "Kyle Morrison wasn't Danny's partner that day," Harvey said grimly, his legal mind processing the evidence. "He was his backup. And when the situation went bad, he chose to save himself instead of his fellow officer." The room fell silent except for the approaching thunder and Rex's steady breathing. Mrs. Giovanni, who had been quietly knitting in the corner, set down her needles with shaking hands. "That bastard let Danny die alone. then spent 6 years torturing the dog who tried to save him. It's worse than that, David continued, pulling up additional files. I cross-referenced Morrison's personnel record with the incident reports. He received a commendation for bravery in connection with Danny's death, a medal for attempting to rescue a fallen officer. He built his entire career on that lie. Dorothy stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Rex knew. All this time, Rex knew the truth. That's why Morrison couldn't stand looking at him. Not because Rex failed to save Danny, but because Rex was a witness to Morrison's cowardice. The pieces clicked together with the inexorable logic of a well-built case. Morrison hadn't abandoned Rex out of guilt over Danny's death. He'd tried to eliminate the only living witness to his own betrayal. The slow poisoning wasn't mercy killing. It was murder designed to silence a dog who had seen too much. "We have to take this to the police," Maggie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Internal affairs, the district attorney, someone who can—" "Can what?" Harvey interrupted gently. "This footage is 6 years old, and Morrison has already confessed to animal cruelty. Double jeopardy prevents prosecuting him twice for the same crime period, and proving cowardice isn't the same as proving a prosecutable offense. So he gets away with it?" Mrs. Giovanni's voice rose to a pitch that could etch glass. "Danny dies trying to save children, Rex nearly dies trying to save Danny, and Morrison walks away with a medal and a pension?" David shook his head, a smile spreading across his young face. "Not exactly, Grandpa Harvey. Remember what you taught me about civil litigation? Different standards, different remedies?" Harvey's eyes lit up with understanding. "Wrongful death. We can't prosecute Morrison criminally for Danny's death, but we can sue him civilly. Lower burden of proof, and the statute of limitations doesn't expire until the truth is discovered." "Sue him for what?" Dorothy asked practically. "Danny didn't have a family, no dependents to claim damages." "Rex," Maggie said quietly, the solution dawning on her like sunrise. "Danny's will designated Rex as his beneficiary. If Morrison's cowardice led to Danny's death, then Rex, as Danny's dependent, has standing to sue for wrongful death." The legal theory was unusual but sound. Police dogs were considered officers in many jurisdictions, and Danny's will had specifically designated Rex as his beneficiary. If Morrison's failure to provide backup had contributed to Danny's death, then Rex's suffering represented damages that could be quantified in court. It would be unprecedented, Harvey mused, his lawyer's mind already working through the arguments. A police dog as plaintiff in a wrongful death suit. The media attention alone would be worth millions in publicity. "And Morrison's pension," David added, pulling up another screen of financial records. "Arizona state law allows civil judgments to garnish public employee retirement benefits in cases of gross misconduct. We could take everything." Rex chose that moment to stand and walk to the center of the room, his movement careful but deliberate. His left paw extended not toward any individual, but toward the group as a whole, as if offering his consent to become the face of a legal battle that would expose the truth about his partner's death. "Are you sure about this, boy?" Maggie asked, kneeling beside him. "It means more publicity, more strangers, more questions about Danny and what happened to him." Rex's response was to place his paw in her hand and hold her gaze with eyes that reflected intelligence, determination, and something that looked remarkably like justice. He had spent 47 days reaching out for help, and now help was reaching back in the form of truth, accountability, and the promise that Danny Murphy's sacrifice would finally be honored. The storm broke outside as they began planning the lawsuit that would make Rex the most famous police dog in Arizona history. Thunder rattled the windows of Desert Wind's senior community, but inside the recreation room, the sound was like applause, the universe itself approving of their decision to fight for justice, regardless of the odds. Morrison had stolen 6 years from Rex, built a career on Danny's grave, and nearly succeeded in eliminating the only witness to his cowardice. But Rex had survived, found allies, and now possessed something Morrison had never expected: the truth, the law, and a community willing to fight for what was right. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this began, they were fighting with weapons that could actually win the war. 6 months later, Rex lay peacefully in Maggie's lap as autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Desert Wind's Memorial Garden, a space that hadn't existed before their fight for justice had transformed the entire community. His breathing was labored now, each inhale a conscious effort, but his eyes remained bright with the intelligence that had made him such an exceptional police dog and teacher. The cancer had progressed exactly as Dr. Chen predicted, but Rex's final months had been filled with dignity, purpose, and love beyond measure. The memorial garden itself was a testament to what their battle had accomplished. Danny Murphy's photograph hung in a place of honor, surrounded by plaques commemorating other fallen officers whose stories had been forgotten or distorted by bureaucratic indifference. Rex's favorite spot was beneath a young oak tree planted with soil from the abandoned gas station where Maggie had found him, symbolic of how something beautiful could grow from the most barren places. The lawsuit had concluded 3 weeks earlier with a settlement that exceeded even Harvey's optimistic projections. Morrison's pension, his commendation medals, his accumulated savings, everything had been transferred to a foundation bearing Danny Murphy's name, dedicated to the care and retirement of police K-9s throughout Arizona. The legal precedent they'd established would protect working dogs for generations to come, ensuring that no animal would ever again be abandoned to die slowly in the desert heat. "The reporters want one final interview," Dorothy said gently, settling into the chair beside them with the careful movements of someone whose own body was beginning to fail. At 75, she'd found renewed purpose in managing the Danny Murphy K-9 Foundation, channeling 4 decades of veterinary experience into ensuring that retired police dogs received the care they deserved. Channel 12, the Arizona Republic, and that documentary crew from Los Angeles. They want to capture Rex's final message. Maggie stroked Rex's head, feeling the slight tremor in his muscles that indicated his body was preparing for its final journey. "What do you think, old man? Feel like teaching one more lesson?" Rex's left paw moved slowly toward her hand, the gesture that had defined their relationship and become a symbol of hope for abandoned animals across the country. His eyes met hers with an expression that seemed to say he understood the weight of his legacy and was ready to add one final chapter. The interview setup was minimal: a single camera, sensitive microphones, and the documentary director who'd been following their story since the lawsuit began. Sarah Martinez was a Phoenix native who'd grown up hearing stories about police dogs from her father, a retired officer who'd worked with German Shepherds for 20 years. Her documentary, Reaching Out, had already won preliminary awards at film festivals nationwide. "Just tell his story," Sarah said, her voice soft with the reverence that Rex's presence seemed to inspire in everyone who met him. "Tell it like you'd tell a friend who'd never heard it before." Maggie took a breath, her hand resting on Rex's side where she could feel his heart beating with the steady rhythm that had sustained him through everything. "Rex came to us when we were all invisible, forgotten seniors in a retirement community where people went to wait for death instead of living. He was dying too, slowly poisoned by someone who should have protected him, abandoned by a system that viewed him as disposable property." Rex's breathing changed slightly, as if he were listening to his own story being told. His eyes remained fixed on Maggie's face, trusting her to get the words right, to honor not just his suffering, but his triumph. "But Rex taught us something that we'd forgotten after decades of being overlooked by our families, our communities, our world. He taught us that reaching out, that simple gesture of extending your paw to every person who passes, isn't about what you can get. It's about what you can give. Hope, connection, the reminder that every life has value worth fighting for. Dorothy leaned into frame, her weathered hands gentle as she adjusted Rex's position for maximum comfort. This dog spent 47 days reaching out to strangers who drove past him without stopping. He never gave up believing that someone would see him, would recognize his worth, would choose to help instead of looking away. And when we finally stopped, when we finally saw him, Mrs. Giovanni added, rolling her mobility scooter closer to join the conversation, he didn't just save himself. He saved all of us, gave us purpose, gave us fight, gave us a reason to matter again. The camera captured Rex's subtle response, a slight wag of his tail, the ghost of the enthusiasm that had once marked his service as a police dog. Even dying, even in pain, he was still trying to comfort the humans who'd gathered around him. The lawsuit wasn't about money, Harvey said, his legal mind cutting to the heart of the matter. It was about truth, accountability, and the principle that those who serve, whether human or animal, deserve better than abandonment when their service is complete. Rex's victory will protect every police dog in Arizona. His legacy is measured in lives that will be saved, retirements that will be honored, and the promise that no working animal will die forgotten. Sarah's next question was directed at Maggie, her voice gentle with understanding. What would you want people to remember about Rex when this story is shared? Maggie looked down at Rex, whose breathing had grown shallower but whose eyes remained alert and engaged. I want them to remember that Rex never stopped reaching out, even when it would have been easier to give up, even when the people he was trying to help couldn't see his value, even when staying silent would have been safer than telling the truth. He was a teacher until the end, Dorothy added, her voice thick with emotion. Those veterinary students learned more about compassion from Rex in 6 months than they could have learned in years of textbooks. He showed them that every animal, young or old, healthy or sick, valuable or discarded, deserves to be treated with dignity. Rex's paw moved one final time, extending toward the camera as if he were greeting the thousands of people who would eventually watch this interview. The gesture was weak but unmistakable, carrying the same message he'd been sending for over a year. I see you, I value you, and I'm reaching out because connection matters more than fear. The most remarkable thing about Rex, Harvey said, his voice carrying the weight of legal experience and personal transformation, is that he never became bitter, never stopped trusting, never let the cruelty he experienced turn him cruel in return. He chose love over revenge, hope over despair, service over self-pity. As the interview concluded and the camera equipment was carefully packed away, Rex settled more deeply into Maggie's lap. His breathing was peaceful now, each exhale longer than the one before. The community that had fought for him gathered close. Dorothy with her medical expertise, Mrs. Giovanni with her fierce protectiveness, Harvey with his legal victories, and dozens of other residents who'd found purpose in their shared cause. I need to tell him something, Maggie said quietly, and the group gave her space for a private moment with the dog who'd changed all their lives. She leaned close to Rex's ear, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the memorial garden. Danny would be proud of you, boy. Proud of how you fought, how you forgave, how you kept reaching out until someone reached back. You kept his promise. You served and protected right until the end. You can rest now. We'll take it from here. Rex's eyes found hers one final time, and in them she saw not just peace, but satisfaction. His left paw moved slowly toward her hand, completing their last handshake as partners in the fight for justice and dignity. His breathing grew quiet, then quieter, until it stopped altogether as the sun set over the Phoenix Mountains. The German Shepherd, who'd reached out desperately from an abandoned gas station, had become the most famous police dog in Arizona history. His foundation would care for hundreds of retired canines, his legal precedent would protect working animals for generations, and his story would inspire people around the world to notice the forgotten, help the abandoned, and never stop reaching out to those who needed hope. Rex had taught them all that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is extend your paw and wait for someone to reach back. And when they finally do, you can change the world together. Sometimes the most profound moments in life come disguised as ordinary Tuesday mornings, when routine is interrupted by a choice that changes everything. Rex's story began with a simple decision. An elderly woman choosing to stop instead of walking past, to see instead of looking away, to care instead of staying safe in her comfortable isolation. That moment of connection transformed not just a dying dog's fate, but an entire community of seniors who had forgotten their own worth. At 68, Maggie discovered that her greatest purpose wasn't behind her in decades of military service, but ahead of her in the simple act of extending compassion to a creature who'd been abandoned by those sworn to protect him. Rex taught desert winds that retirement doesn't mean irrelevance, that fixed incomes don't limit generous hearts, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for ourselves, but for those who can't fight alone. His legacy lives in every senior who chooses to matter, every abandoned animal who finds sanctuary, and every person who learns that reaching out, despite fear, despite limited resources, despite society's message that your usefulness has expired, is the most powerful thing you can do. When Rex extended his paw for the last time, he wasn't just saying goodbye. He was passing the torch to anyone brave enough to keep reaching out to a world that desperately needs their wisdom, experience, and love. Questions for interaction. When was the last time you chose to stop and help instead of walking past someone in need? What dreams or purposes are you still reaching for in this season of your life that others might consider too late? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.